The Miami Dolphins had it all just a few years ago. Their young quarterback was showing flashes of brilliance thanks to his duo set of superstar wide receivers. They built a competitive defense with a few elite players, and their head coach was coming to prominence as one of the many exciting young offensive gurus. But now as 2025 is about to begin, every piece of that identity has began to crack as the Dolphins have settled into the bottom third of the league. Between personnel losses and a total breakdown in culture, this is exactly why the Miami Dolphins have the scariest and a nightmare future in the NFL. Now, to understand how we got to this scary future that they do have, we have to actually go back to 2022 when, in all honesty, the Dolphins found a groove and looked pretty good that year. They had just fired Brian Flores and replaced him with longtime 49ers assistant Mike McDaniel. With his more modern offensive scheme, young quarterback Tua Tagovailoa finally settled into his role as the starter alongside Jalen Waddle. And yes, while injuries did hold the team back in their first 3 seasons under McDaniel, they started with a hot 8-3 record thanks to an explosive offense created by Tua, Waddle, and the newly acquired receiver Tyreek Hill. Helping them out was Raheem Mostert, an older back who benefited from McDaniel's system in order to crack nearly 900 yards on the ground in a pass-heavy attack. In 2023 though, truthfully, the Dolphins were pretty much as explosive and as dangerous as they had ever been, even dating back to when they had Dan Marino. For the first time in his career, Tua started every single one of the Fins' 17 games and validated his 2020 draft status, throwing for 4,600 yards and 29 touchdowns. Miami scored the second most points in the league at 29.2 thanks to Tua's emergence and a squadron of superheroes around him. Tyreek Hill led the league in receiving yards and touchdowns with 1,799 and 13 touchdowns respectively. Meanwhile, Jalen Waddle also crossed 1,000 yards and added 4 touchdowns. Add in the fact that Raheem Mostert continued to show out with 1,000 yards rushing and a league-leading 18 rushing touchdowns. I mean, he still did all of that in spite of having a breakout rusher in Devon Achane who gathered 800 rushing yards as a rookie while missing 6 games. This offense was the same one that delivered the infamous 70-20 game against the Denver Broncos, a game in which Achane had a hat trick. And Mostert scored 4 times before the backups tagged in. The 2023 defense was no joke either, led by star defensive tackle Christian Wilkins and veteran cornerback Jalen Ramsey acquired in a preseason trade. The Dolphins came within a hair of winning the AFC East over the Buffalo Bills, but a rough late season loss to the Ravens put them on the back foot before losing against Buffalo in the regular season finale. This forced them to face the Chiefs in the first round of the 2023 playoffs, and in sub-zero conditions, the Dolphins were in way over their heads against the eventual champions, scoring just a single touchdown in the early second quarter before being shut out for 44 minutes. Despite the disappointing loss, the Dolphins had an overwhelming amount of hope for improvement going forward after their 11-6 season. Tyreek Hill was named the best player in the NFL through the top 100 list, and while he and Mostert both made all-pro teams as well. Unfortunately though, it's really just been all downhill for Miami ever since. Add in the fact too that, well, their roster was kind of picked apart in 2024 at free agency, and that doesn't help either. Between the major contracts of Hill and Ramsey and the pending deals for Waddle and Tagovailoa, they didn't have much money to allocate for other players, especially the anchor of their defense. Christian Wilkins was left for the Raiders, signing a massive deal with them, and the rest of their defensive studs didn't stay much longer. Brandon Jones and Deshaun Elliott both departed from the secondary, while the linebacker core was decimated by the losses of Andrew Van Ginkel and Jerome Baker. Robert Hunt then departed to Carolina, beginning the rapid decline of Miami's O-line. And I mean, they did try to stop the bleeding with below market free agents and a focus on keeping their offense elite, and they did so by extending Waddle first, giving him a 3-year-long extension worth $85 million. Tua, despite just 1 good year of production, was demanding a rookie extension of his own at the same time too. I mean, even after picking up his 5th-year option, Miami couldn't afford to wait and gave him 4 years, $212 million, with most of it guaranteed despite all of the injury concerns. Now with those two and Tyreek tied down, the offense remained the scariest in the league. Year 2 Devon Achane was exciting, while the promise of yet another Hill and Waddle dominance did loom upon everybody. Bad news though was that, well, the looming threats started pressing into the Dolphins. The first thing we have to go over is kind of just how the ownership was starting to take its toll on the team. And now, yes, there will always be a debate about how good of a coach Brian Flores was with the Dolphins, but his allegations that owner Stephen Ross encouraged him to tank in 2019 have all but been confirmed despite league reports, and Ross's shady dealings had been further exposed in 2023 when the league punished him for tampering with both Tom Brady and Sean Payton in attempts to both go to Miami.
For suspended, the Miami Dolphins owner Stephen Ross has been sidelined.
Investigators found tampering violations of unprecedented scope and severity.
This ended up costing the Dolphins a first-round pick in 2023 and a third-rounder in 2024. This then fed into Miami's other issues, a lack of ability to draft special players really in any draft recently. Most of the players drafted by Miami in the past decade never signed a second contract with the team, whether it was because they were traded away, couldn't hack it in the pros, or were bought out from under the Dolphins like their entire 2023 defense. And fun fact, if you actually didn't know this either, is that, well, since 2020, since they've been drafting, they haven't drafted a Pro Bowler besides Tua except for Robert Hunt. Every other draft pick they've had has been pretty bad overall. The team did do all right in the 2024 draft, picking up promising edge rusher Chop Robinson and developing tackle Patrick Paul, and Miami needed one once the season got rolling. With one of the weaker schedules in the NFL, the team was expected to improve upon their 2023 results, and in fairness, the defense held up their end of the bargain. Thanks to the leadership from their new acquisition Jordan Brooks and Jalen Ramsey, the Fins allowed just 21 points per game, good enough for 10th in the NFL. Surprisingly enough, it was the offense that couldn't deliver, and well, I bet you'll never guess why. Yes, I'm being sarcastic. Unfortunately, as was becoming an all too familiar issue, Tua Tagovailoa was limited in 2024 thanks to a multitude of injuries, including a few concerning looking concussions. Even when he was on the field, his play felt significantly impacted by reckless mistakes and continued battering behind a mediocre offensive line. They were 2-4 without Tua, relying on a rotating carousel of backups, starting former Raven Tyler Huntley, and the whole offense suffered from the breakdown, going without a 1,000-yard receiver for the first time since 2020. The running game also did take a step back despite a solid effort from A-Chain, who went for 900 yards and 12 total touchdowns plus another 600 in the air. Without the dominance of Tua though, the Dolphins couldn't score points, finishing in the middle of the pack in red zone offense, scoring just 56% of the time from inside the 20, down from 65% in 2023. They did stay in several different games thanks to impressive defensive performances like against the Jags, Patriots, and Rams, but most of their wins came against awful or just injured teams. After a 2-6 start, Miami did manage to rip off a 5-2 stretch, but then lost Tua for the final 2 weeks of the season and split their last 2 games to finish with a losing 8-9 record. Immediately, questions began swirling around why the team had taken such a large step back from a successful prior season. Many questions such as, was paying Tua a massive mistake? Is Mike McDaniel a good enough coach to uplift an injured or mediocre team? And how can they get over the hill going forward? And then, well, right as the season ended, Tyreek Hill poured gas on the fire, insinuating in a post-game interview that he didn't think the Dolphins could be a winning team and that he may want to leave. And yes, while it does seem he has backed down a bit, the sparks of displeasure radiated to other Dolphins, with Jalen Ramsey seemingly set to be traded and another massive wave of players electing to move elsewhere in free agency. Notably, safety Javon Holland and D-lineman Calais Campbell and Emmanuel Ogbah elected to sign elsewhere, as did Raheem Mostert, apparently not wanting to continue sharing touches with A-Chain and Jalen Wright. Add in the fact too, on top of all of those free agency departures, longtime left tackle Teron Armstead elected to retire, leaving another gaping hole in a line needed to protect one of the most injury-prone quarterbacks in recent history. And I mean, truthfully, after going over all of those things too, it's very easy to see all the holes that the Dolphins do have on their roster and in their culture. And don't get me wrong, because they did have a productive draft, bringing in potential Christian Wilkins replacements with Kenneth Grant and Jordan Phillips, they didn't draft an offensive tackle to replace the retired Armstead, leaving the job currently slotted for Patrick Paul, who was far from impressive as a rookie. They also failed to draft a single corner, with the Ramsey trade getting closer as the season approaches, and maybe even just to get cut off of his contract. Their starting corners right now, yes, this list is crazy, are currently Storm Duck, Cam Smith, and Jason Marshall Jr. Leave a comment below if you know that any of those guys were NFL starters. And that's no disrespect to those players, but the entire Dolphins roster is in disarray, and a few good player additions don't seem like enough to float the sinking ship. Entire AFC East seems to be improving, with the Jets hiring culture builder Aaron Glenn to rescue them from Aaron Rodgers, and the Patriots bringing in Mike Vrabel in the best 2025 class in the league to resurrect the Patriot way. Also, Josh Allen is just Josh Allen. Like, I mean, the East is less less winnable than ever, and the Dolphins keep making themselves worse. And now, yes, I mean, you could argue that Miami had a slight Super Bowl window in 2023, forced open by a high-powered, unstoppable offense and a star-driven playmaking defense, but going into 2025, they have neither of those things, and they might have the opposite, honestly. Like, I mean, even if Tyreek Hill does remain a Dolphin, his prime is behind him, as we saw last year. Add in the fact, too, that when Tua was on the field, he still didn't have all the same power and speed he did in past years, and with all the distractions in his life, he isn't getting much better anytime soon. Waddle is a solid playmaker, but there's no evidence that he can be anywhere near as productive as a late prime Tyreek was with Miami. On top of all of that, though, too, the run game is still an afterthought, with A-chain speed not being enough if the O-line can't succeed thanks to their lack of talent and depth. But we all know that the biggest problem is the guy under center. Tua isn't just a danger to himself on the football field, he's also a liability when he doesn't have a perfect situation around him. In 2023, he had 2 top caliber receivers and a pair of Pro Bowlers on his O-line. The contract validated the Mustangs of the Pro Tua crowd, but he remains a very mediocre passer. Not because of the mechanics or the arm strength, he's deceptively solid with those, but his decision making is shaky and isn't helped by McDaniels' shaky coaching. If people think Brock Purdy is a weapon merchant, wait until you have to watch Tua play with an offensive line with only 1 or 2 competent blockers and receivers who aren't 3 miles open. If Waddle and Hill don't keep making him look good, this offense is just going to sink even deeper. Like, I mean, truthfully, between just a very depleted defense and an offense that's trying to grasp at straws and recreate something they had 2-3 years ago, Miami's putting themselves in an awful position ahead of the 2025 season, in my personal opinion. Like, I mean, another busted year will likely lead to McDaniel losing his job, and there isn't enough foundational talent on the team to initiate a good rebuild. The teams that build well from the ground up have a young, talented offensive line, a cheap quarterback, and a few great playmakers to elevate a defense. The Dolphins, they have none of these things, so they are only doomed in 2025, and they don't have any hope until they can admit that Tua is an overpaid game manager and that they need to start over again. Regardless, though, there isn't going to be an AFC title or even a winning record in the near future for Miami. And the worst part, they won't be bad enough to get top draft picks that have helped teams like Houston and Cincinnati overcome poor decisions from the ownership. So that's the thing. The future for the Dolphins is the scariest because it isn't awful, it's painfully mediocre.